Բարև ձեզ։ Այսօր կզրուցեմ Հարավային Կոնեկտիկուտ համալսարանի փիլիսոփայության բաժնի պրոֆեսոր Armen Marsoobiani հետ. Mr. Marsoobian, thank you for accepting our invitation.
It's my pleasure.
Mr. Marsoobian, you are considered a descendant of the Dillian family who lived in the Ottoman Empire. As we know, the Dillians had photographic studios in several parts of Ottoman period, but what makes their photographs more significant and why are they considered an important legacy today?
They're important in a number of respects. One is that the collection of photographs, many thousands of photographs, survived because the family of the photographers, my grandfather and his brother, had survived the genocide in 1915. There were many other families of photographers in the Ottoman Empire, in the interior, in Anatolia, in what is Eastern Turkey now, who did not survive, and their output was, much of it lost, some of it in the diaspora because it was sent out. But what makes the Dillian collection unique in that sense is the survival of it. And also the second aspect is the fact that the family continued photography from 1888, when my grandfather started, to the 1980s, when his son stopped doing photography in the United States. So it's almost 100 years of continuous work in photography over two generations. You would think for that many years it would be three generations, but it stopped with my uncle and also my mother, who was a photographer. So that's unique in terms of one family continuing photography for that long. And the other fact is that so much of the output survived, and much of it produced before 1915, and then a large amount produced after 1915 in Greece, where the family relocated in 1922, and in the United States.
How did they keep these activities during all these hard periods? How did they continue doing photographs?
That's the amazing part of the story, was that they were able to continue during two world wars and also the Armenian Genocide. During the First World War, both my grandfather and his brother, Tsolag and Aram, were allowed to remain in Marsoobian, where the family was located, because the government needed them as photographers, and both of them were in the Ottoman army, and they were allowed they were not deported with the rest of the Armenians from Marsoobian, on the condition that they continue the photography for the army. And the other condition was that they had to take Turkish names and had to convert to Islam, which they did very reluctantly, but the choice was deportation or save the family. And they decided to save the family. And when the war ended, they took back their Armenian identity and their Christian identity. Not that they ever really truly became Muslims, they just went through the ceremony. And then they resumed their photography at the end of the war. They were doing photography during the war too, most of it for the army, but none of that is in the family collection. It's only a few photos during the war that are in the family collection. But after the war, they continued to take photography for Near East relief, for the orphans. They ran orphanages, and then they were forced to leave Turkey in 1922. And they set up again a studio in the refugee camps, and they continued to do photography, opened 2 studios, expanded, and then the Nazis came and occupied Greece. And they kept the studio going during the Nazi occupation. We have no photographs of
they
Nazis.
Lived in Greece?
In Greece. Yes. So it was, I always find it amazing that they had the fortitude and the courage to keep doing what they loved to do. It was also their occupation. And they continued after they emigrated to the United States, continued with photography. And I'm just very privileged to have received a good portion of the archive from my uncle, Hamayak.
And you are here today in Armenia to have an exhibition to present your personal yet deeply historic project, this legacy dedicated to the Armenian Genocide. It will be shown and exhibited in the History Museum of Armenia. How are you feeling, and with what feelings are you presenting this project in Armenia?
I'm feeling very proud about it, and I want to make clear that the exhibition is not about the genocide, but it's about the ability and the agency of Armenians to have been, to have not only prospered in the Ottoman Empire, and then afterwards in the diaspora to rebuild their lives. So it's not an exhibition about the catastrophe itself, but it's about the agency, the ability, the heroism of the family, and the creativity of the family to continue with photography and to prosper over a long period of time. So you will see in the exhibition many photographs of not just family, but the work they produced, Armenian costumes that they put on. They were very proud of their Armenian heritage. You'll see also costumes from the History Museum that are the same as the ones that were taken of members of my family back in 1910, 1908. And you will also see the places where members of the family worked, which was Anatolia College, which was an American missionary college. My grandfather was the photographer of the college, so he produced many photographs for the students, the professors, the American missionaries, and he also produced photographs for the people that would eventually force them to leave Turkey, the Kemalists and the nationalist leadership that came through Samsun and Marzipan. So I'm proud to showcase their legacy, and it's their work. They're the ones who tell the story because they wrote about what happened to them, and they took photographs about their lives and the lives of their community, the Armenians, the Greeks, and also the Turks in the Ottoman Empire.
You spoke about your family as they got back to the Armenian identity after so many different periods. What could be the main message nowadays for Armenian diaspora in this sense?
The message today is, that's a good question. I would say that one of the things that was a concern, and this is written by both my grandfather and his brother, was the preservation of Armenian identity. And this is evidenced in the work they did with the orphans. The American missionaries were concerned about the physical survival of the orphans. But my family that worked with the Americans was concerned with the survival of their Armenian identity. So they worked very hard to make sure that these young orphans learned the Armenian language, learned the Armenian culture, even when it was prohibited by the Turkish government in 1921, 1922. The Turkish government under the Kemalists said that there should be no teaching and no education, no language instruction, because they wanted to make the Armenians into Turks. And my grandfather and his brother found ways of teaching secretly so they could keep their identity. So if they went to all that trouble, you could see how important education was for the family. They were very important about passing on the heritage. They did heroic efforts to keep their Armenian identity. When they moved to Greece, they did the same thing. They helped found the Armenian schools in Greece. So it was, they saw Armenian identity important, and also an important contribution to world culture, not just Armenian culture for Armenians, but to share that with wherever they were, whether it was in Greece or in the United States.
Do you feel that working on the archive of photographs has also been a journey of understanding your identity as a descendant and as a researcher?
Yes, it was. I've discovered so much that I didn't know. I mean, I knew part of the story from my mother and a little from my uncle, but I did not know. For instance, I knew that they survived in 1915 because of the photography, but no one in the family told me that they had converted to Islam and taken Turkish identities to survive. There were little hints of it, but it was never made clear. Part of it is because I guess it might not have been known. My mother was very young at the time. So I only discovered that about 15 years ago in reading some journals that my great aunt had written. And she tells in her journal, in her diary, the names, the Turkish names that my mother was given, my grandfather was given, my mother's brothers. All of that was a discovery for me, and it made me much more interested in finding out exactly how their lives were, then how they survived, and that began the process of my going to Turkey and finding the family house, which still exists in Marsoobian, and seeing the other houses that were still there of the Armenians, meeting people there, and then bringing the photographs to an exhibition in Marsoobian. I had 5 exhibitions in Turkey between 2013 and 2015, and in Istanbul and in Ankara and Merzifon'u, 2 in Istanbul, and then in Diyarbakir. And I wanted to share with the hope that sharing this with the Turkish public, they could come to terms with their own history. And many have, but there was progress, and there isn't as much progress now under the current government for the last 5-6 years. But I'm hopeful that there'll be other opportunities to tell the story in Turkey again. And some of my work has been translated into Turkish, and I hope more of it will be in the future. But I am guardedly optimistic for the future, but it's always a struggle.
You said that you have showcased this legacy in Turkey as well, but what was the reaction, like particularly from the local audiences about
It was
this?
very positive at the time. And in 2013, the first exhibition when we first started planning it in 2011, we were a little afraid of questions of security, and there might be a nationalist reaction. But by the time we had the exhibition, we didn't have that worry. And a lot of people attended, very positive. In Istanbul, there was positive press at the time. But it became more difficult as the years went on, and as you know, I must mention that the person who was most responsible for bringing the exhibitions to Turkey and was a good friend of mine, was Osman Kavala, who has now been in jail for 8 years on charges that are unjustified. And there's been, as I said, there hasn't been progress. There's been regression in terms of political openness to questions of the history of Turkey. And it's not just the Armenian history, but it's also questions of the Kurdish history, and we hope there'll be change. We don't know when it will come, but I believe change is inevitable. But I would say overall, I had a very positive reaction from audiences. Of course, many of the audiences came because they were interested. It would have been nice to reach people who had a differing opinion, though there were a few people who came who didn't believe that a genocide had happened, but they liked the photographs and they thought this was beautifully done. They had positive things to say, so that's always gratifying to me. And I hope there'll be more opportunities in the future. And there's always, whenever I go to Turkey, I always come across some part of the Armenian past. Last weekend, I spent 2 days in Istanbul on the way here, and I was staying in a new hotel. Turned out the hotel, part of it is an old building, and I only discovered the next day that it was an Armenian school. The Mkhitaryan Tabrots, founded in 1830, and they've preserved the old building and made it into a hotel. I didn't know it when I booked the hotel that it was an Armenian school.
But do we have this school in the photographs?
No, they didn't take photographs in Istanbul. There's one photograph in the collection I have that was in Istanbul, but there were many Armenian photographers in Istanbul, or Constantinople it was called. So they didn't start a business. There was too much competition in Istanbul.
Wow, this might be very surprising for you to find out that it was Armenian school.
Yeah.
Well, talking also about Armenian local audiences, what do you think, what could be the message for them, especially for young generations?
Are you talking about here in Armenia? I think for younger generations, I always think it's important to ask about their parents and their grandparents. It's always important to be grounded in your own heritage, and that heritage begins with your own family. That knowing about your roots are so important in providing you grounding for whatever you choose to do. You are not here just by, you're not who you are just by luck. There are things that your parents have done and your grandparents have done and your great-grandparents have done. And it's important for you to know some of that, to see how they managed and struggled and found their way in the world, to give you a good sense of who you are. And I think I know in the United States now a great interest about what they call genealogy and finding out, where you came from and, when your great grandparents emigrated to the United States. And I think it's important in any country because it gives you a certain perspective on history, your place in the world, and not everything is instantaneous. On social media, you want to see where you came from, and I think it's there. The technology now is there to make it so much more easier to find out things about your family story, your history. I teach a course with a filmmaker in Connecticut at the University of Connecticut with students, and we ask them to bring objects from their family that are important, that have been in your family for a while, and tell the story about the object. And of course, they have to ask their parents about the object, how it came to the family, whose was it, and put together a narrative, and then they make a small film about the object. And it gives them a very hands-on way of grasping their own family story and their history. And it's beautifully, and these are not Armenian students, these are just, students who were, one is a student that was adopted from China, another one is from Afghanistan. They're able to sort of connect to their own story. So I think I think giving them also that they're interested in the technology anyway, so make use of the technology.
It will make their work easier, I think, in modern times.
Yeah.
That sounds very interesting. I think we should have this course in Armenia as well.
Well, I had suggested this might be in the future. The filmmaker I work with wants to come to Armenia, and I've talked with various people about bringing the idea of this, bringing objects and storytelling. AUA has a program that deals with narratives and storytelling. So hopefully we can work out something to have a similar thing. It's the students are all very into the making little videos and things. So they have the skills already. We give them a little direction, and it would be I think it'd be very positive.
Mr. Marsoobian, as I getting back to the exhibition that was in Armenia this time, as we know that this year, and the exhibition was also dedicated to the Armenian Genocide, you said that it's not only about Armenian Genocide, but this time it's dedicated to this. And this year marks the 111th years anniversary of the Armenian Genocide. In your view, how has the process of genocide recognition and also the denial, the fight against denial evolved, and how we should approach this issue in modern times?
I think denial, in many ways, has failed. Okay, and I will qualify this in the sense that, as a historical fact, it's not controversial anymore that there was a genocide. Historians, for the most part, agree. Reputable historians certainly agree. It's very accepted in genocide studies. I teach courses in genocide studies, and I know colleagues who do. They're not Armenian. They often begin by talking about the modern concept of genocide with the Armenian genocide. So there isn't any controversy in terms of the knowledge out there, or disputes about what happened. Recognition is a separate political issue that, as we know, depends on geopolitics. At this point, many nations have recognized the Armenian Genocide. The United States Congress recognized it. President Biden has used the words of Armenian Genocide. So I don't think that debate is really a debate anymore. Where it becomes, I think, an issue is when we don't learn the lessons of the genocide and do things that separate us from our past. And I say this as someone in the United States who currently is very concerned about how American history is so important to teach in a way that we understand that it isn't always just all these important and successful things we do. We have to acknowledge all the problems, all the failures, not that there aren't successes. So I always think that denying history always puts it at risk of repeating the wrongs that we've done in the past. So I think that for any nation, a good, healthy, critical view of its own history is important to prevent future wrongs. And I think we know in authoritarian societies, and of course Armenia is surrounded by authoritarian societies, autocratic societies, they control the history. They control the history because they want to remain in power. And I think it's very important for democracy, and I say also democracy in Armenia, to have an open, frank discussions about history, about the past, about failures in the past. And, you know, every nation has things that they should rightfully be ashamed of having done. The United States had slavery for a good portion of its, you know, it's not, you know, we're not the ideal model of what a democracy. We had a democracy for 70 years that had slavery. So it's not, you know, it's not something that we should be ignoring. So I think it's very important to make sure the history is done and your history is told in a frank and open way, and you know, from both personal perspective and from the national perspective. You know, people who have things in their family history that they'd rather keep quiet from their children. It's not necessarily a healthy thing to do, to, you know, keep people in ignorance. I think it's important to have an open, frank, critical discussion of history, and we should encourage our politicians or government not to tell teachers what to do. I'm a very strong believer in academic freedom and giving teachers freedom to explore any issue that is of educational value.
Thank you for the interview, Mr. Marsoobian.
Okay. Yeah.
Ես զրուցում էի Հարավային Կոնեկտիկուտ համալսարանի փիլիսոփայության բաժնի պրոֆեսոր Արմեն Մարսուբյանի հետ։ Կհանդիպենք։